So we're going to take a look today at the UniFi Security Gateway. It's their basic model. It's about $100. I think I paid for it, $109. I maybe can find it on sale for a little less, but it's pretty straightforward. I don't really get deep into unboxings. Just wanted to show you what it comes with and what's inside. So we have the UniFi box itself. Power cord, manual. I did already open it. There was some plastic in here I did remove. I opened it and did a couple tests with it. I just wanted to get the testing done and do some uploading while I was shooting this part of the video later. Anyways, gotta get started manual. I think it says that the VoIP on here, because here's the ports on there, which is console for serial console. And we'll talk about that later because a lot of what you have to do on this comes from the command line. You have the WAN, LAN, and VoIP, but the VoIP can be set to really easy click of a button, a secondary WAN, so this can be used for a failover or load balancing. Now I will note this is a pretty solid build. It is metal and it is wall mountable, and it comes with the screws inside of here to wall mount it. So it's an all metal build, everything, which is kind of cool, just except for these little rubber feet on the bottom. And it lights up like any other UniFi, so nothing too much to write about as far as that, but it does look nice, and you can mount it and on the wall and keep your wiring clean. So let's get into the adoption, provisioning, and all the software set up on it.
So we have the UniFi Gateway set up and plugged in. Now, by default, it is a 192.168.1.1 is the default address of the device, as stated in the little booklet they give you. You can edit the configuration to say DHCP, which is the default, or static IP, so you can get it internally set up. And this is only allowing you to configure the WAN side of it. We're going to leave it at DHCP because for our lab network, that's why you're seeing a non-routable IP, non-externally routable IP right here. So it picked up, right through the DHCP server, the primary DNS and everything else. Now you notice it says, please install the UniFi controller software to manage the gateway. And it does have the option to change the inform URL, which that's what allows you to configure this gateway to be managed remotely. So you can change this and point it to your cloud install. By default, it's going to look locally for UniFi 8080 like all the other UniFi devices do. So let's go over to the software and look at it adopting it. So here it is, and we're going to go ahead and adopt it into this network. Now, this is the same network I created at the last video. So we're going to go ahead and adopt, provisioning. Okay, now we have a provision, so now we're going to go ahead and do a firmware upgrade on it. All right, so we have the device updated and to the latest 4.334 firmware. It's up and running, everything's working, it's provisioned, and I've been using it for a little while so I can have some statistics in there. Well, the first thing I did as soon as I got it running was turn on the deep packet inspection. Now, what this allows it to do is not really see inside the packets. Common question I get is, can it see all the network and can I see and filter certain traffic? Well, the problem is most traffic is encrypted now, not all of it, but it is really moving quickly towards all traffic being encrypted. So all your major sites, Facebook, Google, and all them, you don't see within the traffic. Now, you can block those sites based on DNS information, but you can't see within the packets to do things like web acceleration or specific types of URL filtering outside of the DNS. So it does do deep packet inspection as it's looking through the packets, but it's not able to see directly into the traffic. So we'll go back up here. So our networking is, it's the same software we use to set up. This is our same one we had set up in a previous tutorial for our test Wi-Fi. Then we have our networks themselves. Here is the LAN network, and now we can edit this and it shows up and gives us some detail. And here is where you set the DHCP range. This is right out of the box default, which is 6 to 254. So it pretty much makes all of the IP addresses available. You can override name servers on here, set the lease times. It does have DHCP guarding as available, but it has features that integrate further with a UniFi switch. On a nice note here, you have these green lights over on the side of the device, which is the WAN LAN. Green is for 1 gig connections, and orange is for a 100 or 10 megabit connection. So you actually know right now I'm plugged into a gigabit switch, which is kind of cool. I like the way it does that, so you can see the status lights on there. There's not a whole lot in here. Then you have the routing and firewall, so you can create static routes, and they're standard static route creation, next hop distance, black hole it, next hop. So you could do some type of routing in here if you needed to, and for example, black hole certain subnets if you wanted. Then it's got the firewall rules. Now, these are the default firewall rules, basically to allow traffic to pass, accept drop, WAN, WAN local, LAN in, LAN out, LAN local. And when you want to create new rules, it's a little bit confusing. You can do it by creating the group here first, or within the rule. When we create a rule, when you want to create the destinations or the sources, you can create the address group or address port, for example, like port 80, and name it. So it also has the option to create port groups, which is kind of interesting. So you could say this group belongs to, let's say, a NVR system, and it has like 4 ports that need to be open. Well, that port group can belong to that. I've messed around with a little bit. The firewall is not intuitive at all. I didn't find it to be the easiest firewall. One thing I did like is it defaults to secure. By default, it wants to drop all the packets, and you have to choose accept. Whether or not you want to disable P2P, whether or not it matches any of the IPsec rules. So there's a lot of rules you can create in here, but it's not an intuitive interface. And a lot of that's because the firewall rules for both the Edge Router OS and this USG, which is very similar, are done from the command line. So you actually would do all the firewalls from here is how it normally works. That's why a lot of the routing and firewall has a little beta next to it, because traditionally with these devices, you configured them from the command line. Now, there's a config.boot. You can do a show firewall states. There's a few commands you can do. I'm not going to get into a whole tutorial on those. I'm not that great at it. I'm more of a pfSense guy and used to using a web interface. It is what it is. The config.boot is at least a text file, and I'm not going to bother looking at it here. I pulled it up over in something a little bit easier to read. SFTP'd in. I'll open it with Genie here, and you can kind of get a look at it. So you can look at how the ports work and all the settings, the networks. As long as you follow the format, it should work fine. Now, this does offer, when you're setting up some of these, a save state and a running state. So you can config things but not save them into memory, then push them in. It's like this on a lot of other commercial firewalls like Cisco and things like that, where you can test a firewall, show the differences. There's some tutorials and documentation you can find through them, and of course manuals on how to write these firewall rules. But like I said, that's beyond the scope of what I'm going to be doing today. I just want to give you a quick review of the USG system. The nice thing is, this is getting better and better with each iteration of the UniFi software. They're adding more and more features within this whole interface. That way you don't have to go to the command line to do everything. Your backups and maintenance, all that's the same as it is in all the UniFi software, but now it's also backing up this as a device. The device, though, one thing is port forwarding. A little bit weird. You can play with it through here, and there's a lot of options, but I'm really glad they added this. I can go over to configuration whenever you have the device open over here on the side, and then we can just go to port forwarding, create, name, let's say web server, then the port's 80, the IP address, apply, it provisions, and that port forward works. It takes about 20 seconds to provision. It's pretty fast. So thought that was weird that it's over here, not in the firewall rules. So that's a little bit confusing. I think the other partly confusing part is I don't know what happens if you have more than one of these devices, how these firewall rules work in terms of showing the settings in here. The other weird thing is the firewall rule that I just provisioned doesn't show up anywhere in these rules. So I guess I don't know, this confuses me a little bit the way it works. I know the port forwarding works. I did test it, not a problem there. So it's just kind of weird it doesn't show up in here. But I did test in the config file. So after this is done, now this is provisioned, we can go back over here. And right there's the port forward rule in the config.boot file. So it does work, it does save it. It just doesn't show up back over in this part, which I just find kind of strange. But I won't dwell on that too much. I just wanted to show you how it worked. Now, with the deep inspection and gathers some statistics, we can show you what that looks like. It starts out, and we'll clear all the categories. It's kind of weird because it just blanks it all out like there's no information here. But that's because you have to click on each thing so you can break down the data in here. So instant messaging data, network management data, remote access terminals. So you can clear them and then say, I only want to see traffic from this. It does have options to add different categories in here. So I thought this was kind of neat. So you can really track down what people are doing, but I didn't really see any type of method by which you can block. As I can tell, all that has to be done from the command lines. I was kind of hoping there's some easy way to go through and say, okay, I just want to edit this traffic and block this traffic, but there's nothing really here. It just lets you see all the traffic and lets you see all the client data so you can see who's doing what, but it doesn't give you much in the way of actually editing that data that I'm aware of. But it's still pretty cool. You can also look on a per device basis for the deep packet inspection. So like this, I only have my computer, and I think my phone is connected to this too through the Wi-Fi. You don't get a whole lot of things that you can do with there. It's more of a so you can view, but doesn't give you a lot so you can do. That would be the best way to describe it. Speed test on it, and this is speed test of my ISP itself, who is Comcast. We have a 50 megabit connection, and it does fine, showing that 50 megs come through. I did my usual iPerf speed test as well through this, and I was really impressed. Full gigabit speed pretty much through it. I really like 1 or 2 megs slower than when I connected it directly, but it was not consistent. I think there's always some jitter that you get back and forth when you're doing that testing, but it's within 1 megabyte of what it was directly through the switch. No need to even display the speed routing through this. I'm really impressed with how fast the device is. I did this with the deep packet inspection turned on. So if you have a gigabit internet connection, this has the capability of routing it without really any issues. So you have your usual insights, which of course now it gives us more information than it did when you had just the wireless, because you have the deep packet inspection and going through the firewall. All in all, though, it's not a bad little device. These cost around $100. Other than being able to see in the traffic, they're really not the most impressive. They're fast. They give you some insights into your network, but they don't really do much else. Not overly impressed with it. I mean, I guess if you really wanted pretty interface and a good firewall, you can use it for that and see statistics on, how much data is being pulled by different devices on your network with this really nice interface. But feature-wise, unless you're ready to break out the command line, it's a little tricky to configure. And the firewall routing is not super intuitive, but as a basic box, it does work. Now, the good news is you have the option, even though it's labeled VoIP in there, you can check a box that lets you turn the WAN 2 on via, instead of being a WAN, instead of being VoIP, it turns into a WAN. Very cool. It also offers smart queues, but they're really, really basic, and the smart queues are their version of QoS, but it doesn't give you much drill down like prioritizing of protocols. It just lets you filter specifically, like let's say we're going to slow down these ports to this speed. But on a good note, you can do a failover WAN by having a second WAN connection on here, and it's an inexpensive device for that because you can have WAN 1, WAN 2, and it allows you to set them by default as a failover, and you can set a DHCP or static and say, okay, I have 2 internet connections and I want it to just fail over on there. Now, it does have a weighted load balancing, so when one of the WANs is too saturated, and you can set the threshold for, by default, it's 50%. That's kind of cool too, because then you can have, okay, there's a failover automatically if it's just too saturated, start using this connection, which will probably work in the failover configuration in terms of when one of the connections drop, because it then technically becomes saturated. But I'm not really going to get deep into testing that. It's just not. It's not the device I'd recommend. I'd still go with the pfSense for that because it gives you so much more detailed control over both load balancing and the ability to do failover. But all in all, the device itself is nice. It's metal. It seems solid. The reputation of UniFi for producing solid, reliable hardware is definitely there. The updates, as they keep coming through to the new UniFi software, do keep adding features. So I'm looking forward to reviewing this again in the future when it has more features in the web interface, so we don't have to break the command line out to do it. Overall, like I said, it's a good device. Not bad for the price, but not amazing. But the deep packet, I gotta admit, the interfaces that UniFi gives are really nice. So if you're really into the nice interface for this traffic information, it's definitely might be something for you. If not, it's skip it and go with my usual recommendation of a nice pfSense box so you get all the bells and whistles and features, or just go with their basic edge router that mostly does the same thing with a less pretty interface but gets fast routing done for $49 with the Edge Router X. Something fun though, you can make it blink. So I thought that was kind of cool too. It does have the blinking option on there. I guess if you had a few of these, you could make each one blink. Kind of novel. That's it for my short little review of the UniFi USG and some of the port forwarding in it. Like I said, that was oddly placed over in the side, but it works. If you like the content here, like and subscribe, and I'll keep an eye out for the new firmware and re-review this device with the updated firmware as it adds more features. Thanks again.